How's it going, guys? This is the second controller I'm taking apart, and I figured I could show you what happens when the buttons pop out. Any like um, of the harder things that you'll run across while doing this. Um, Again, just lay the battery over. You'll have a screw here. If at all possible, I can't stress this enough, unless you're taking the complete controller apart to clean it, if it's really filthy, like this was in good shape, it's not dirty at all, I suggest whenever you, like I showed on my previous video, when you pull this cover off, lift from the back and then slide forward and make sure the triggers don't hang. What they'll try to do is hang on this lip here, and you can just kind of bump them and work them that way that they don't pop loose. But if they do, we'll solve that problem too. Another thing is just make sure that whenever you lift your board out, to be careful of your wires for your vibration motors here, or tumblers as some people call them. They're really thin. Now what I do is I just put force, pinch on the board itself, and then pinch and lift up. Now you see this trigger here has come up. Sometimes you just can't stop it, especially with this style, because it has these little plastic pins that come through the board that stabilize the board. It has one there and one here. Let me lift it up there where you can see it better. These little plastic pins, where they're like guide pins, will help you orientate your board whenever you get ready to put it back in. But the best thing to do is just hold down on the little plastic pieces that the motors are resting in, and then it'll just pop out. It's got a little mushroom top on it that helps it hold for use purposes. Now remember, just take and flip this up. Now we're going to I'm going to do the fix on this also, where the foam up underneath this ribbon cable is worn out from usage, and it causes your buttons to shift. But this one is for, you can watch my previous video for that. Let me remove this battery just to make it easier. Some of these are very hard. I'm just going to leave that one in because it's just stuck in there so hard. Some of them just pop right out, but this one here's hanging on for dear life, and it isn't worth pulling the wires out, because if you pull the wires out of the little socket here, it's a pain to get them back in and get them back stabilized. You'll always have a problem with it. The thing that I was wanting to show you, see how this is loose here, how both of them are just kind of like rattling around. What you'll do is tilt it forward and kind of just feather touch the top buttons, and then you'll grab it, pick it up and pull it forward, and you'll feel when there's a little notch in there. You'll feel whenever it slides in that notch. Now what's happening is it's got a little rubber bumper up underneath it with a magnet on it, And what happens when you depress the switch, it hits the rubber bumper and then causes the magnet to touch, and that's how you get your sensor readings or your trigger readings. Pull it forward, and it's best to just keep the board like between your fingers and just keep the board pulled back out of the way. Now if you're we'll go through that also on here. If you're got shaky hands and you do something like pull the trigger off itself, these will come off not really easy, but they'll come off. They're on a little pole that snaps into position that orientates it. See, that's the way that it's supposed to be. See how it's nice and stable, and how this one is just rocking. You can tell whenever you've got it seated correctly, because the button, the bottom button will depress and feel normal. If you don't have it in all the way, the button will be kind of stiff and won't really depress right. You can tell, but you can also tell whenever you have it seated in there. There's also a little slot on the back here. The back of the trigger, what you can do is just pull your thumbsticks out. See, this is the little ribbon cable with the foam up underneath it. What you can do is, when you pull it forward, you'll see it's got a little slot in there. Make sure that you can see it on the white plastic, and then a little protrusion of black plastic it'll slide right down in there, and that's what stabilizes it and then orientates it for the buttons. Now with that done, it'll take some finagling, and you'll have to get a feel for it, because it's quite frustrating when it does, but it's not near as frustrating as whenever you're trying to pull off your top piece and the trigger itself pops off like that. You're like, oh my god. Well, you see this tiny little spring. That's catching on. It's got a tiny little spring on it, and that's what gives it the floating action or the trigger action. Well, you see the little barrel on the lid. There's a slot on both sides, and there's a slot in the. Let's get it with a light. You can see where the barrel goes in there. Now, make sure that the spring itself is pushed forward, and be careful not to bend it. And it's very easy to do. You really can't, and these things are pretty tough. You just line your pin up, make sure it's got a little area for the pin, the spring itself to rest on. Put the trigger back in there. Make sure that whenever you put your trigger back, you can see the little rubber part that I was telling you about that has the magnet on it. Make sure that it stays back. You have to kind of pull on it and then push down. Let me get my glasses. Remember, use your finger just to pull the thing back, and then snap it in place. Like I said, if it was easy to do, guys, I wouldn't be making this video, because I've spent a lot of time. Some of these are very frustrating to get back situated in there. And I don't want, you know, a lot of people tear it apart and just show you bits and pieces, kind of like I did on my first video, without really explaining what can happen. You know, when the reason why I stressed about make sure that whenever you lift it off to lift like that and don't pull these up, because you can do it without this, and it's really time saving. But once you get comfortable with it, it isn't bad at all. And it goes in just like that. Alright guys, you can check out the other part of the video for me putting the tape. Just lift this little ribbon cable up here. It'll have, as you can see, the little two holes on both sides that orientate it. You just slip it forward, put your tape up underneath the bottom, because it has a little magnet to it also, what allows it to read across there. And always make sure that you wash your hands, and this is tedious. If your hands start sweating, just take the time, get you a rag or a paper napkin, and keep your fingers dry. You don't want any oil on the back of this. But yeah guys, I hope that helped, and it's a little bit more descriptive than the last one. But have fun with it and don't get too stressed out. If you get stressed out on things like this, tedious little parts, back away from it. That's what I do, and go back to it whenever you've got more patience. Peace out from Texas, guys.